62 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And this week, the Pima County Sheriff's Department made something official that 2 months of internet speculation had already decided on its own. They cleared the family, not quietly, not in passing, officially, every sibling, every spouse. The entire Guthrie family has been confirmed as not suspected in Nancy's disappearance. Tommaso Cioni, who drove Nancy home on the night of January 31st, took a polygraph test. He passed. He cooperated fully. He is not a suspect. That confirmation did not come this week. It came weeks ago, but it has not stopped the narrative. And that gap between what investigators confirmed and what continues to circulate is exactly what this video is about. Because here is the thing. The internet did not invent that suspicion from nothing. It came from real facts. Tommaso was the last person to see Nancy. He drove her home. The garage door closed behind her at 9:50 that night. Those are confirmed facts. And when a camera captures a masked man at that same front door hours later, and law enforcement releases almost no information about who sent ransom notes or what the DNA at the scene shows, speculation moves into the space that evidence has not filled. That is not a defense of what was said about Annie and Tommaso Cioni. Savannah Guthrie sat down with Hoda Kotb on NBC on March 26th and described what that speculation has done to her family. She said it piles pain upon pain. She said there are no words. She was not speaking abstractly. She was speaking about a specific experience that her sister and brother-in-law have lived through for 2 months, while also being present every day for a mother who has not come home. But here is what the narrative got wrong. It answered the wrong question. It asked who was responsible and pointed at the people closest to the victim. Investigators asked the same question and cleared those people, which means the actual question, the one that has been sitting underneath this entire case, has not been answered. It has barely been asked. The man on that doorbell camera moved through that property without hesitating once. He located the camera. He knew where to reach. He knew about the plant beside the door. He did not look around. He did not adjust. He went directly to where he was going. If no one in the family told him anything about that house, then how did he know it? That is the question this video is built around. Not who the internet suspected, what investigators actually found when they looked, and what that finding reveals about a layer of this case that has been largely ignored for 62 days. April 7th is 5 days away. For the first time in this investigation, the sheriff leading the case will answer questions under oath. What he says may finally give this question the beginning of an answer. If you are new to this case, 2 minutes of the essential facts and you are caught up. If you have been following since February, the analysis starts right after the recap. Either way, subscribe before you leave. We cover every development on this case the moment it happens, and the next 5 days are going to matter. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in a neighborhood called the Catalina Foothills, north of Tucson, Arizona. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, who co-anchors the Today Show on NBC. She has a pacemaker and takes daily medication to manage her health. On the evening of January 31st, she joined her older daughter Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni for dinner and a game night at Annie's home nearby. She had arrived by Uber earlier that afternoon. Around 9:48 that night, Tommaso drove her home. Garage door logs and a neighbor's Ring camera both confirmed his car left at 9:50. The door closed. That was the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie was inside her house. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, her front door camera went offline. 41 minutes later, at 2:28, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. When Nancy did not appear for a virtual church service that morning, her congregation reached out to the family. Relatives drove to her home around 11. They found her phone. They found her wallet. They found her car. She was not there. At noon, they called 911. Deputies found blood near the front entrance. DNA testing confirmed it was Nancy's. The Pima County Sheriff declared the home a crime scene and stated that investigators did not believe she had left voluntarily. The FBI joined the investigation. Google engineers recovered doorbell footage from back-end servers after the physical device had been tampered with. On February 10th, FBI Director Kash Patel published that footage from his personal account on X. It showed a masked, armed individual at Nancy's front door. The FBI described him as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, dark mustache, wearing a ski mask, gloves, and a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking backpack. His firearm was holstered in an unusual position on his body. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has officially confirmed that the entire Guthrie family, including all siblings and their spouses, has been cleared as suspects. No arrest has been made. No official suspect has been publicly named. The family is offering $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI has posted a separate $100,000 reward. Neither has been claimed. That is 62 days. That is what is confirmed. And the narrative that has dominated 2 months of coverage has been officially ruled out by the people running this investigation, which means the question underneath it has been waiting. Here's what it actually looks like when you examine it directly. The narrative did not begin with malice. It began with proximity and a 4-hour gap that no one could explain. Tommaso Cioni dropped Nancy off at 9:50 on the night of January 31st. Investigators confirmed that. The garage closed. His car left. And then, for the next 4 hours, there is no confirmed record of any activity at that address. No camera, no signal, no digital trace of any kind until the front door camera went offline at 1:47 in the morning. When you are watching a case unfold in real time, and the last confirmed human contact is a family member, and the next confirmed event is a masked man at the front door, the mind does what minds do. It connects the nearest points. It builds a line between what it can see. That is not unique to this case. It is a pattern that shows up in every high-profile disappearance that plays out across social media in real time. The people closest to the victim become the first subjects of public scrutiny, not because of evidence, but because of position. They are the ones whose names are already known. They are the ones whose movements have already been reported. And in the absence of an identified suspect, they fill the frame. In this case, Tommaso Cioni's name was attached to speculation within days of the footage being released. Some of it came from side-by-side image comparisons of his build and the masked figure on camera. Those comparisons circulated widely. Law enforcement did not confirm any similarity. No investigator assigned to the case made any public statement connecting the two. The comparisons were made by people who had access to the same publicly released images that everyone else had, and who drew conclusions that the agencies running the investigation did not draw. Nancy Guthrie's name entered the same conversation for a different, but equally structural reason. She was the last person to host her mother. She lived nearby. She and Tommaso were, by every account, the family members most present in Nancy's daily life in Tucson. Savannah told Hoda Kotb in her March 26th interview that Annie and Tommaso made it possible for their mother to remain in the house she loved. They were there every day. That closeness, which in any other context would be described as devotion, became the foundation for a theory that had no evidentiary support. Here is what the spread of that narrative cost. Savannah used the word unbearable. She said it piles pain upon pain. She was not speaking about general grief, which was already present and already heavy. She was speaking specifically about the experience of watching a theory about her sister's culpability circulate publicly, amplify across platforms, and attach itself to a family already in crisis. According to a report from South Hill Enterprise, Savannah has been considering legal action against at least one media figure whose public statements contributed significantly to the spread of that narrative. That cost is personal and documented. But there is a second cost that is less discussed and more consequential for the investigation itself. When a false narrative becomes loud enough, it functions as noise in a system that depends on signal. Investigators received more than 13,000 tips in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance. The FBI established a 24-hour command post, specifically to process them. Every tip that pointed toward the family, toward Tommaso, toward Annie, toward a theory that investigators had already begun testing and clearing, was a tip that required processing time. It entered the queue, it was evaluated, and it returned nothing because it was based on a premise that the evidence did not support. That is not a theoretical cost. In an investigation where the primary DNA sample is a mixed profile that may take up to a year to separate, where the crime scene was released before federal investigators indicated they were finished, where the forensic window is already narrow, the diversion of processing resources toward confirmed dead ends has a real effect on the timeline for pursuing leads that have not yet been exhausted. Investigators did not dismiss the family narrative from the outside. They applied the same methodology they apply to every lead in a case of this kind. They looked at Tommaso Cioni's movements. They tested his account of the evening. They administered a polygraph examination. He passed. He cooperated with every request made of him. And the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a formal statement clearing the entire Guthrie family, including every sibling and every spouse, as suspects in Nancy's disappearance. That process, from initial scrutiny to official clearance, is exactly how it is supposed to work. The problem is not that investigators looked at the family. The problem is that the public narrative did not update when the investigation did. 2 months later, the speculation is still circulating. The clearance is confirmed. The gap between those two facts is where the real question about this case has been living, largely unexamined. And that question is not about the family at all. It is about the man on that camera. The one who was not cleared because he has not been identified. The one whose movements suggested a familiarity with a property that no public explanation has yet accounted for. That is where the next layer begins. The Pima County Sheriff's Department cleared the Guthrie family. Every member, every spouse. That is confirmed by multiple agencies and multiple statements made across February and March. Tommaso Cioni took a polygraph and passed. Annie Guthrie was never a person of interest in any official capacity. The investigation is not looking at the family. Those facts are settled, and they make the footage harder to explain, not easier. Watch the footage again with the family removed from the frame entirely. A man approaches the front door of a residential property in a neighborhood with no streetlights, in the hours after 2 in the morning. He does not pause at the entrance. He does not sweep the property with his eyes before moving forward. He walks directly to the door, locates the camera mounted above it within seconds of arriving, reaches for it with a gloved hand, fails to dislodge it, turns to a potted plant beside the door, pulls a branch across the lens, and continues. Former FBI senior profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, speaking to CNN, identified 2 specific qualities in his behavior. The first was calmness. He showed no visible signs of heightened stress during any part of the approach. The second was adaptability. When the first method of disabling the camera failed, he did not hesitate. He identified an alternative and used it. O'Toole said that level of composed response in an unfamiliar environment under pressure points to either innate temperament or prior experience in comparable situations. But there is a third quality in the footage that received less analytical attention than the first 2. He knew where the plant was. The potted plant beside Nancy Guthrie's front door is not visible from the street at that hour. It is not a landmark. It is not something a person approaching that door for the first time, in darkness, would clock within seconds as a usable tool. The speed with which he identified it and acted on it is not consistent with a first visit to that address. Multiple law enforcement sources told Fox News and ABC News, independently, that the masked man... According to those sources, one working theory is that he came earlier, noticed the camera, and left. He came back on the night of the abduction prepared for it. The Sheriff's Department, when asked about the timing of the images, said there was no date or timestamp on the photographs, and that conclusions about different dates were speculative. They did not deny the prior visit. They declined to confirm the timeline publicly. What is not speculative is the request the Sheriff's Department made to neighbors. They asked for footage going back to January 1st. They specified 2 windows they considered significant. January 11th between 9 in the evening and midnight, and January 31st between 9:30 and 11 in the morning. Those requests do not get made without a reason. Law enforcement does not name specific dates and specific hours without having a theory about what those dates and hours contain. A neighbor named Aldine Meister told Fox News Digital that she had seen a man walking in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood in the weeks before Nancy disappeared. She described him as someone whose clothing did not match the activity. His hat was pulled low over his eyes. She said she knew it was after January 8th, when she had had visitors staying with her, and at least 3 weeks before the abduction was reported. She noticed. She remembered. She did not know, at the time, that the detail would become relevant. Here is what the clearance of the Guthrie family reveals when placed next to that neighbor's account, the 2-date request from law enforcement, and the behavioral analysis of the footage. The man who took Nancy Guthrie did not arrive at that address by accident on the night of January 31st. He had been there before. He had surveilled the property. He had identified the camera. He had located the plant. He had watched the routine of the house closely enough to know when it would be most vulnerable. And then he came back. That is not the behavior of someone acting on a tip passed in casual conversation. That is the behavior of someone who conducted a deliberate, extended reconnaissance of a specific target. The family did not tell him anything. That is confirmed. So the question of how he knew that house has only one remaining category of answer. He learned it himself. He went there. He watched. He prepared. And that means the question of who this person is, and how he came to select this particular address on this particular street, is the only thread in this investigation that has not yet been pulled to its end. This is the layer that the false narrative about the family kept out of the center of the conversation for 2 months. The man on that camera is still unidentified. The reconnaissance he conducted before February 1st is confirmed by multiple law enforcement sources and consistent with his behavior on the night itself. And 62 days into this investigation, no public explanation exists for how he found that house or why he chose it. Subscribe if you are not already. The next part of this video goes directly into what investigators have gathered, what they cannot yet use, and where the thread actually leads. In the 7th week of the investigation, Sheriff Chris Nanos told reporters something that received less attention than it deserved. Investigators had come to believe, he said, that something may have occurred in the weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Catalina Foothills home. He did not specify what that something was, when exactly it happened, or how it connected to the night of January 31st. That statement was made in March. It has not been followed by a clarifying press conference. The significance of what Nanos said is not in the detail he provided. There was almost no detail. The significance is in what the statement implies about the shape of the investigation. When a sheriff leading a 60-day missing persons case tells the public that investigators now believe the relevant timeline extends backward from the night in question, he is describing an investigation that has moved past the crime itself and into the period of preparation that preceded it. He is saying, in the careful language that law enforcement uses when an active case constrains what can be disclosed, that the night of January 31st was not the beginning. It was the execution of something that had already been in motion. That framing changes the investigative frame entirely. Expert sources close to the investigation have described a theory, not yet officially confirmed, that the suspected perpetrator, or an associated party, may have visited Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood on or around January 11th, 3 weeks before her disappearance. That date has not been confirmed by the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department as a proven data point. What has been confirmed is the investigative action that supports the theory. The Sheriff's Department formally requested that any resident within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's home submit surveillance footage covering the period from January 1st through February 2nd. That is a 33-day window. Law enforcement agencies managing a high-volume active investigation do not issue that request for a crime that began and ended in a single night. They issue it when they believe a pattern of presence preceded the event, and when they are looking for a vehicle, a face, or a behavior captured on a camera that the owner has not yet thought to review. 3 weeks of advance presence, if confirmed, reframes every one of the 6 knowledge categories this video has mapped. Timing precision does not require 3 weeks of surveillance to establish. But 3 weeks of observation allows something beyond timing. It allows the accumulation of a complete operational picture. Which cars arrive on which nights? Whether family members follow a regular schedule of visits. How long Nancy is typically alone between the end of an evening with family and the earliest possible moment someone might check on her the following morning. Whether lights in specific parts of the house follow a pattern that indicates where she sleeps. Whether the neighborhood itself follows rhythms, which properties have dogs, which have motion-sensitive lighting, which streets carry late-night traffic. 3 weeks of patient observation by someone who understood what they were looking for would have answered all of those questions before a single operational decision was made. The FBI's separate line of inquiry points in the same direction from a different angle. Investigators asked neighbors in the Catalina Foothills area specifically about contractors, landscapers, and pool workers who had been active in the neighborhood in the weeks and months before Nancy's disappearance. That request was not about the night of January 31st. It was about the period before it. The profile of person being asked about a worker with a professional reason to be present, a functional knowledge of property layouts, and a routine that would not attract attention from residents is precisely the profile of someone capable of conducting reconnaissance without triggering suspicion. A landscaper moving through a neighborhood over several weeks accumulates the kind of environmental knowledge that an outsider attempting covert surveillance would struggle to obtain without being noticed. The FBI was not asking those questions out of procedural thoroughness. They were asking because someone with that kind of access and that kind of accumulated knowledge fits the intelligence gap this case has been circling since February. The cameras mounted on the fence and driveway of Nancy's property provided investigators with weeks of footage predating the abduction. Law enforcement sources confirmed to CBS News that those images were reviewed in full and showed family members, regular service workers, and nothing flagged as suspicious. That finding does not close the question, it redirects it. If no one visible on those cameras raised concern, then either the reconnaissance was conducted from positions not covered by those specific cameras, or the person gathering intelligence had a legitimate reason to be present that made their presence invisible to the kind of review those cameras support. A person who belongs in a neighborhood does not trigger alarm on a fence camera. They belong there. That is the point. The partial DNA profile recovered from inside Nancy's home remains in the forensic genealogy pipeline, the methodology being applied the same approach that identified the suspect in the University of Idaho murders after months of parallel investigation builds outward from a partial genetic sample through public genealogy databases, constructs a family tree, and narrows toward a match through a combination of genetic and traditional investigative work. It does not produce results on a predictable schedule. What it produces, when it produces, is a biological connection between the partial sample and a living person. Whether that connection leads to the executor of the abduction, to someone in the intelligence chain, or to both simultaneously is not something any public source has addressed. It remains an open thread in a case that has accumulated more open threads than closed ones. The Ransom communications add a layer to this picture that has not been fully integrated into the intelligence chain analysis. 2 deadlines passed without consequence. No direct contact was established with the Guthrie family through any channel that investigators have publicly described as authenticated. The notes arrived at media organizations, not at the family's door. A California man was arrested on federal charges for impersonating an abductor and attempting to extract payment from the family, a crime the sheriff's department confirmed was entirely unrelated to the original case. That confirmed fraud illustrates something important about the information environment surrounding this investigation. The public profile of the case was large enough to attract opportunists within days of Nancy's disappearance. People who had no connection to what happened were nonetheless attempting to insert themselves into the financial dimension of it. That context raises a question that has received almost no public attention. If the ransom notes that arrived at newsrooms in the first week were genuine communications from the person or persons responsible, and that has not been confirmed, they represent a communication strategy that failed to achieve any of the functional requirements of a ransom negotiation. No proof of life was provided. No secure channel for exchange was established. No mechanism for verifying the sender's identity was offered to the family. The deadlines expired without follow-up action. Whatever the notes were intended to accomplish, they did not accomplish the mechanics of an actual ransom transaction. The most straightforward interpretation is that the people responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance are not experienced in ransom negotiation. That interpretation is consistent with the holster evidence of firearm carried incorrectly, in a rig sized for a different weapon, by someone with no apparent professional firearms training. It is consistent with the profile of an operation whose planning was sophisticated and whose field execution carried visible signs of amateur inexperience. But a second interpretation is also consistent with the evidence, and it is one that the intelligence chain framework this video has been building makes harder to dismiss. The ransom communications may have served a purpose other than extracting payment. They directed investigative and media attention toward a financial motive at a moment when the investigation was still in its earliest stages. They created noise around the question of who sent them, requiring investigators to authenticate and trace communications that may not have originated from the principal actors at all. They consumed tip-line capacity and public attention during the period when the operational trail was freshest. Whether that was intentional or incidental cannot be determined from the public record, but the effect was real, and it is worth holding in mind as the pattern of deliberate information management in this case continues to accumulate. The intelligence chain does not end with the execution. It extends into everything that followed. The Uber ride data, the January 11th reconnaissance theory, the workers' inquiry, the genealogy DNA, the ransom communication structure, the internet outage, and the sheriff's silence about the motive. Each of these threads is a different entry point into the same underlying question. Who managed the flow of information about Nancy Guthrie, and in which direction did that information move? Before the operation, from source to planner. During the operation, from planner to executor. After the operation, from whatever is being protected to the silence that is currently protecting it. That final direction is where the sheriff's withheld motive sits, and it is where this case, at 60 days, remains most completely unresolved. Unsolved America will follow every development in this investigation as it emerges. If you have information about any activity in the Catalina foothills area from January of this year, the FBI tip line is 1800CALLFBI. $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI. No detail is too small to report, because the family said so directly, and they said it because they understand that the answer to this case is not inside the investigation record. It is inside someone's memory of something they saw or heard before February 1st. There is one more question that all of these threads have been building toward. It is not about what happened on January 31st. It is about what the full picture of the intelligence gathered on Nancy Guthrie tells us about who had the standing, the access, and the reason to compile it. And when you place the confirmed investigative record against that question, the answer that emerges is not comfortable, because it does not point outside Nancy Guthrie's life. It points somewhere considerably closer to the center of it. On February 7th, 6 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, her family released a coordinated video statement. Savannah appeared on camera alongside her siblings. The statement was prepared, it was deliberate, and it contained a sentence that, in 62 days of coverage, has never been fully examined for what it actually means. Savannah looked at the camera and said, "We received your message and we understand. Not we have heard the reports. Not we are aware of communications that have been described in media coverage. We received your message, present tense, direct address, to a specific party, about a specific communication that the family confirmed, on camera, they had received. No law enforcement agency has publicly confirmed what that message was. No official statement from the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI has described the nature, origin, or content of any verified communication from a person or persons connected to Nancy's disappearance. The ransom notes that arrived at multiple media outlets in the days following February 1st have not been authenticated by any agency. 2 deadlines contained in those notes passed without public resolution, and yet on February 7th, the family said they received a message and they understood it. Those 2 facts have to be held together. The family's statement is confirmed. The official silence around what it refers to is also confirmed. And the distance between those 2 confirmed facts is where the most important unanswered question in this case actually lives. If the communication was real, if the family received a genuine message from someone connected to what happened on the night of January 31st, then someone reached out. Someone who knows where Nancy is, or was, made contact with her family within the first week of her disappearance. And that person has been silent since. No further public statements from the family have referenced renewed contact. No law enforcement agency has announced a negotiation, a ransom payment, a proof of life, or a confirmed exchange of any kind. What does silence mean in that context? Is it a negotiating posture, a deliberate withholding of information to protect an active operation? Is it the silence that follows a contact that ended without resolution? Or is it something that the family and investigators are living with privately, in a way that has no public correlate, because the answer it points toward is one that no statement can yet be made about? None of those questions have been answered. They may not be answerable from publicly available information, but the sentence exists. It was said on camera. And it means the question of whether someone has been in contact with this family, someone who knows something about where Nancy Guthrie is not hypothetical. The family confirmed contact occurred. That is the detail that changes the picture when placed alongside what C.C. Moore described in her News Nation appearance in late March. Moore's argument was forensic and specific. If Nancy was transported from her home after the abduction, which is what the evidence suggests, then she was taken somewhere. A vehicle, a property, a structure of some kind. That location is what Moore called a second crime scene. And at a second crime scene, the conditions that have made the DNA evidence at Nancy's home so difficult to use do not necessarily apply. The sample recovered from inside the house on Camino Escalante is a mixed profile. It contains material from multiple contributors. The technology to cleanly separate those contributions does not currently exist in deployable form, according to Moore, who has more direct experience with investigative genetic genealogy than almost anyone currently practicing it. A 1-year timeline, she said, means investigators are not waiting for a lab result. They are waiting for science to advance. A second crime scene offers a different evidentiary environment. If Nancy was held in a vehicle, she left biological material in that vehicle. Her abductor left biological material in that vehicle. If she was held in a room, the same logic applies to every surface she contacted. Those samples, collected from a location where the primary contributor is not a mixed population of several people, could yield a clean genetic profile. A profile that does not require technology that does not yet exist. A profile that could be run through a database or submitted for genealogy analysis and return a result in days rather than months. Moore was precise about this. She said investigators should be looking for that second location. She said if it exists, and if biological material from it can be collected, the identification of the person responsible for Nancy's disappearance becomes a matter of forensic process rather than forensic aspiration. Now connect those 2 things. If someone contacted the Guthrie family in the first week of February, and the family confirmed that contact occurred, then someone exists who knows the geography of what happened after Nancy left her home. Someone knows where she was taken. Someone knows whether a second crime scene exists, and if so, where it is. That person may be the person who took her. That person may be someone connected to the person who took her. But in either case, the family statement from February 7th means the chain of information that leads to a second location is not purely theoretical. It has a human link. Someone reached out. That is what has been sitting in the public record since February 7th. Not a theory. A confirmed statement from the family that contact was made, placed next to a forensic expert's argument that a second location is the most viable remaining path to identification, placed next to 62 days of no arrest, no named suspect, and a primary DNA sample that cannot currently be read. The layers of this case do not resolve into a clear picture at this point. They are not supposed to. The investigation is not finished. But the shape of what remains is clearer now than it was 2 months ago, when the conversation was dominated by a narrative about the family that investigators have since formally ruled out. What remains is a man whose identity is unknown, a house he knew well enough to navigate without hesitation in the dark, a reconnaissance operation that began at least 3 weeks before February 1st, a contact with the family that was confirmed and never elaborated on, a DNA sample that cannot be separated with current technology, and a second location, unnamed and possibly undiscovered, where the evidence that could break this case may still exist. April 7th is 5 days away. Subscribe now if you have not already. When the sheriff takes that oath and answers questions for the first time in this investigation, we will be here for every word of it. As of April 2nd, this is the state of the investigation. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 62 days. She has not been found. No arrest has been made. No official suspect has been publicly identified. The Pima County Sheriff's Department states the investigation remains active. The FBI has reduced personnel in Tucson while maintaining that the case is a federal priority. The reward pool stands at over $1,200,000. $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI, and $102,500 from Crime Stoppers. None of it has been claimed. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home is in a private laboratory in Florida. The processing timeline, according to the genetic genealogist most publicly engaged with this case, may extend to a year or longer, contingent on advances in technology that do not currently exist. The glove recovered near the search area produced no match in the federal database and no connection to the scene. The ransom notes received by media outlets have not been authenticated by any law enforcement agency. Retired FBI Special Agent Jason Pack, who spoke with Parade on the 2-month mark of the case, made a point that is worth holding on to. He is not involved in the investigation, but he said that in cases of this complexity and scale, the most consequential work is almost never the work that happens in front of cameras or in press conferences. It happens in the accumulation of subpoenas, lab returns, financial records, and digital forensics that build toward a moment of action. That moment, he said, does not announce itself in advance. That is either a description of an investigation that is further along than its public posture suggests, or it is a measured restatement of the obvious, that investigations take time, and that the absence of visible progress is not the same as the absence of progress. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive. And without access to what investigators actually have at this point in the case, the public cannot distinguish between them. What the public can observe is this: the narrative that defined 2 months of coverage was wrong. Investigators knew it was wrong. They tested it, cleared the family formally, and moved on. The investigation moved on to a set of questions that have not received proportionate attention. How did the man on that camera know that house? Who or what directed him to that address? What happened between the time Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing and the time her family found the house empty? And what did the family receive on February 7th that they understood well enough to acknowledge on camera? 2 of those questions now have partial, unsatisfying answers. 2 of them have nothing. And on April 7th, the man responsible for leading the law enforcement response to all of them will sit before a board of supervisors and answer questions under oath for the first time. There are 2 things that will determine what the next chapter of this case looks like. The first is what Nanos says under oath about the decisions made in the first days of the investigation, the crime scene, the lab, the coordination failures. The second is whether the second crime scene, if it exists, is found before the surfaces inside it are cleaned, the vehicle is sold, or the window for clean DNA collection closes permanently. One of those things happens in 5 days. The other may already be underway, in a place no press conference has named and no tip line has identified. And Nancy Guthrie has not come home. The story of how Annie and Tommaso Cioni became the center of 2 months of public suspicion is not, at its core, a story about this family. It is a story about how information moves when an investigation cannot move fast enough to fill the space that uncertainty creates. There is a documented psychological pattern in how people process missing persons cases when they unfold publicly and in real time. It is called proximity bias, and it operates the same way in a jury room as it does in a social media thread. The mind assigns probability of culpability based on relational distance from the victim. The closer the connection, the higher the initial assigned probability. This is not irrational in a strict statistical sense. In the majority of violent crimes against adults, the perpetrator is known to the victim. Law enforcement methodology reflects this. Investigators begin with the inner circle not because they assume guilt, but because the base rate of connection justifies it as a starting point. The problem is that public narratives do not operate with the same corrective mechanisms that investigations do. When investigators cleared the Guthrie family, that clearance was formal, documented, and based on polygraph results, physical evidence review, and the full weight of a multi-agency investigation. It was not ambiguous, it was not hedged. It was a definitive, official conclusion. Public narratives do not have a mechanism equivalent to a polygraph result. They do not have an evidentiary threshold. They update slowly if at all, and in many cases the correction never reaches the audience that received the original claim. 2 months after the Guthrie family was cleared, the speculation continues in comment sections and forums and videos that have not been updated to reflect what investigators found. What this case teaches us about the gap between investigation and narrative is something that applies to every high-profile case that plays out across social media. The speed at which a theory spreads is entirely disconnected from the quality of the evidence behind it. A side-by-side image comparison shared by a private account can reach 1 million people in 48 hours. The official clearance of the person in that comparison may reach a fraction of that audience days or weeks later, framed as a footnote rather than a correction. The practical consequence for the investigation is measurable. 13,000 tips flooded into the command post. Every tip pointing toward a theory that investigators had already ruled out required evaluation time. That time came from somewhere. In a case where the forensic window is already constrained by a mixed DNA sample that cannot currently be separated, the diversion of investigative resources toward confirmed dead ends is not a minor inefficiency. It is a cost paid against a limited account. The concrete action available to anyone watching this video is the same one that genetic genealogist C.C. Moore specified publicly. If you have taken a consumer DNA test, download your raw data and upload it to GED Match or Family Tree DNA. Those are the only databases that law enforcement can legally access for this kind of investigation. The instructions are in the description. That single action, taken by the right person, could supply the family tree connection that produces a name from a crime scene profile. If you have an elderly parent or family member living alone, establish a daily confirmed check-in protocol. Not a phone call that goes to voicemail, a confirmed response, a digital signal or visual confirmation at a set time each day. Nancy's absence was noticed because a congregation member reached out when she did not appear for a church live stream. A more structured protocol would have narrowed the window between when she was taken and when she was reported missing. The man on that camera surveilled the property for weeks before he returned. That behavior has observable precursors. Someone walking a residential neighborhood repeatedly without appropriate gear for the activity, without a consistent destination, with a hat pulled low and no apparent purpose, is displaying the behavioral signature of pre-operational surveillance. It does not look dramatic. It looks like an unremarkable person taking an unremarkable walk. The neighbor who noticed it in this case noticed it precisely because something felt slightly wrong. That instinct, when acted on and reported, is one of the few intervention points available before a crime of this kind occurs. The 4 layers of this case have not resolved. That is where this video leaves them, because that is where the investigation leaves them. The narrative that dominated 2 months of coverage was wrong, and has been officially ruled out. Beneath it, the questions that were always the real questions are still standing. How did he know that house? What contact the family confirmed receiving on February 7th, where the second crime scene is, if it exists? And what the sheriff says under oath when he is finally required to answer for the decisions made in the first days of this investigation. We do not run theories on this channel, we run evidence. Every piece of confirmed information in this video came from law enforcement statements, court documents, or reporting by verified news organizations. When April 7th happens, we will be here to break down every question asked and every answer given under oath. Subscribe now so you are here when that breakdown goes up. If you have information about this case, the number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. If you have taken a DNA test, the link to upload your raw data to GEDmatch is in the description. One question to leave you with, and it is the one this investigation has not answered in 62 days. The man on that camera knew where the plant was. He knew it in the dark, under pressure, on approach. How did he know that house well enough to use a detail that small, that fast? 62 days, 4 layers. The family cleared. The suspect unidentified. The DNA locked. The second crime scene unnamed. And somewhere in the space between what the family confirmed receiving on February 7th and what no official has yet explained, the answer to where Nancy Guthrie is may still exist. She has not come home.